Last time we talked about the difference between human nature and the human condition. Now, the human condition is something that Arendt is terming here, Hannah Arendt, and she's distinguishing it from human nature, where it's not something that is objective or absolute. It's not that we have certain properties merely by the fact that we are humans, but the human condition instead is something that by being in a certain time and a certain place, having certain needs and necessities of being the human species, they're all conditioned on what makes us human, which is, again, the human condition. To better understand what Hannah Arendt means by the human condition, she comes up with this term called the Vita Activa. And in this video, I'd like to go over a section of the book that Hannah Arendt has written called The Human Condition to understand what she's trying to get at. She says, with the term Vita Activa, I propose to designate three fundamental human activities: labor, work, and action. They are fundamental because each corresponds to one of the basic conditions under which life on Earth has been given to man. So again, we're not talking about human nature, which is objectively the case, but we're talking about the human condition, and the three conditions of being on Earth as a human are these three terms that she comes up with: labor, work, and action. Now we'll go into those. Quote, labor is the activity which corresponds to the biological process of the human body, whose spontaneous growth, metabolism, and eventual decay are bound to the vital necessities produced and fed into the life process by labor. So if we bracket any kind of definition of what labor is that we use in our everyday life, what Hannah Arendt is trying to say here about labor is that it is the life process itself. It is the reconciliation between the earth and our bodies and our survival as a species. What's also important about labor is that it doesn't really produce anything. It doesn't make anything permanent in the world. We continually consume the things. So we might cook, or we might tend the garden so that we can eat or kind of nourish our bodies. But at the end of this process, there's nothing left over. Now, the second one is work, and we'll talk about this here. She says, work is the activity which corresponds to the unnaturalness of human existence, which is not embedded in, and whose mortality is not compensated by, the species' ever-recurring life cycle. Work provides an artificial world of things, distinct, different from all natural surroundings. Within its borders, each individual life is housed. While this world itself is meant to outlast and transcend them all, the human condition of work is worldliness. So whereas labor is natural, work is unnatural. It's a human artifice that we create. You can think of the buildings that we construct, the activities that we do that create structures that allows us to do certain things in the world. Now you could say one instantiation of the human artifice is capitalism. And by the structures of capitalism, we have things called jobs. And jobs require certain equipment in order to get the jobs done. And one job feeds into another job. And basically all these things we create that remain permanent, at least over some period of time. We create them and put them into the world, which is different from labor, which merely consumes and leaves nothing else. And this is why she says work is worldliness. It actually produces a new world, whereas labor is worldlessness. It doesn't actually produce anything. It doesn't basically create a space for us to be in. It's simply kind of a reactive process by which we sustain our life. Work is something that is creative. And finally, the third thing is action. She says, action, the only activity that goes on directly between men without the intermediary of things or matter, corresponds to the human condition of plurality, to the fact that men, not man, live on the earth and inhabit the world. While all aspects of the human condition are somehow related to politics, this plurality is specifically the condition, not only the condition sine qua non, but the condition per quam of all political life. So whereas work creates an artificial world with certain norms and conforms to those norms such that we can expect how people will act in certain ways, action is the opposite of that. It's built on plurality, which means that people are equally different, and that difference is what makes them individuals. Action is built on the spontaneous choice and action of people in the world, that they can choose whether to go along with the artifice that has been constructed for the world, built over time, or they can choose something new. It's especially important that Arendt says that action is in a world of people and not by yourself. She thinks that by simply removing yourself from the world and not being with others, you are kind of denying the Vita Activa. And she says this actually in the next sentence. She says, thus the language of the Romans, perhaps the most political people we have known, used the words to live and to be among men, or to die and to cease to be among men, as synonyms. And finally, she says, plurality is the condition of human action because we are all the same, that is, human, in such a way that nobody is ever the same as anyone else who has ever lived, lives, or will live. So these are the three conditions that Arendt gives that designate the human condition in the Vita Activa. Again, that's labor, which is the sustaining of the life process, which is something that doesn't really build a world. It's kind of in itself. There is work, which is the creation of the human artifice. You can think of this as kind of the activities in which we endow values onto, such as certain institutions or beliefs. But off of that, she believes that action, which is our kind of spontaneous ability to choose and put something new into the world, to not conform to the norms which have been created by the artifice that work has provided us. Action is the kind of defining characteristic of an individual in a political sphere.